Dear friends, you are in Santa Monica and you are welcome to Santa Monica Bahai Center. So we have another great day before us. Those of you who are in the auditorium, loving welcome to all of you, and also those of you who are on the webinar. You are watching us and hearing the program through the webinar internet. Loving welcome to all of you as well. We are actually in a disadvantaged position because you're seeing us and we cannot see you. So, but we welcome you and we're very happy that you have joined us. I'm sure that, like everybody else, you will enjoy the program today, and we would have a stimulating discussion and presentation by Dr. Stephen Phelps, who is here and will be introduced to you in a bit. We have a little bit of a change of program today in the order of things that we do because we needed to accommodate some people who have some unexpected developments and need to leave earlier. So we begin with some more musical and presentation and chanting in advance at the earlier part of our program, and then where is Sandy Simmons, right, sitting here, who is going to help us? Welcome. She and Jamie Family are our performers. They will help us get us started. And then at some point, I think Sandy will have to leave us today, and Jamie will come back at the end and will help us again. So Jamie and Sandy have been our partners with this program. They have joined us repeatedly, so we express our heartfelt appreciation and thank both of them. They are just partners in putting this event together, so know that. Thank you very much. And go ahead, yes, that's appropriate. Without them, it would be impossible. And of course, Dr. Phelps, this is his second visit to us as well. And I think we would have more visits. That's what I think. So with that, what we're going to do today, friends, as you know, the topic is social change and spiritual transformation, which Dr. First will address after we have a proper introduction. We know we have some devotions or stimulating readings at the beginning, and this time actually we have just 4 paragraphs. These are by Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the Bahai faith, who actually deals with the whole subject of the coming of age of mankind. And it is very much related, I believe, to the talk that Dr. Phelps is going to have and share with us. So we include that in the middle of the music and everything else. So let me ask Sandy to come and get us started with Jamie, if you want to do that with a prayer or something you want to chant or do. Can you do that? Are you ready? Sure, of course. Come on, do that. Whatever fits you, fits us, so do that. Okay. Yeah, okay, sure. Yeah, do the prayer. That's fine. Let's do the prayer.
Oh, just the prayer?
Okay.
Actually, it's the hidden words of Baha'u'llah. O Son of Spirit, oh, Son of Spirit, the best beloved of all things in my sight is justice. The best beloved of all things in my sight is justice. Turn not away therefrom if thou desirest me, and neglect it not that I may confide in thee. By its aid thou shalt see with thine own eyes and not through the eyes of others, and shall know of thine own knowledge, and not through the knowledge of thy neighbor. Ponder this in thy heart, how it behooveth thee to be. Verily, justice is my gift to thee, and the sign of my loving kindness. Set it then before thine eyes. The best beloved of all things in my sight is justice.
Thank you, Sandy, for getting us started. Your time will come. This is not done. We'll have you back momentarily. Friends, let's start by inviting our friends to read this section from the writings of Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the Bahai faith. I will draw your attention, those of you who may not be familiar with this. The last person who would read, this is 4 paragraphs, it's not going to take long. The last read the paragraph. When they read, there is a reference to great ordeal in that paragraph. For those of you who may not be familiar with that, I just wanted to let you know that's a reference to the onset of the World War II, because the timing this material was written, so that you're familiar with that. So let me ask our first reader and then the rest to come up in order, please. Thank you.
This is from The Promised Day Has Come by Shoghi Effendi on the section on religion and social evolution, pages 120 to 121. The revelation associated with the faith of Jesus Christ focused attention primarily on the redemption of the individual and the molding of his conduct, and stressed, as its central theme, the necessity of inculcating a high standard of morality and discipline into man as the fundamental unit in human society. Nowhere in the Gospels do we find any reference to the unity of nations or the unification of mankind as a whole. When Jesus spoke to those around him, he addressed them primarily as individuals rather than as component parts of one universal, indivisible entity. The whole surface of the earth was as yet unexplored, and the organization of all its peoples and nations as one unit could, consequently, not be envisaged. How much less proclaimed or established? What other interpretations can be given to these words, addressed specifically by Baha'u'llah to the followers of the Gospel, in which the fundamental distinction between the mission of Jesus Christ concerning primarily the individual and his own message, directed more particularly to mankind as a whole, has been definitely established. Verily, he, Jesus, said, "Come ye after me, and I will make you to become fishers of men." In this day, however, we say, "Come ye after me, that we may make you to become the quickeners of mankind."
The faith of Islam,
the succeeding link in the chain of divine revelation, introduced, as Baha'u'llah himself testifies, the conception of the nation as a unit and a vital stage in the organization of human society, and embodied it in its teachings. This indeed is what is meant by this brief yet highly significant and illuminating pronouncement of Baha'u'llah. Of old, in the Islamic dispensation, it hath been revealed, love of one's country is an element of the faith of God. This principle was established and stressed by the Apostle of God, inasmuch as the evolution of human society required it at that time. Nor could any stage above and beyond it have been envisaged, as world conditions preliminary to the establishment of a superior form of organization were as yet unobtainable. The conception of nationality, the attainment to the state of nationhood, may therefore be said to be the distinguishing characteristic of the Mohammedan dispensation, in the course of which the nations and races of the world, and particularly in Europe and America, were unified and achieved political independence.
Abdu'l-Baha himself elucidates this truth in one of his tablets. The cycles gone by, through harmony was established, yet owing to the absence of means, the unity of all mankind could not have been achieved. Continents remained widely divided. Nay, even among the people of one and the same continent, association and interchange of thought were well nigh impossible. Consequently, intercourse, understanding, and unity among all people and kindreds of the earth were unattainable. In this day, however, means of communications have multiplied, and the 5 continents of earth have virtually merged into one. In like manner, all members of the human family, whether peoples or governments, cities or villages, have become increasingly interdependent, for none is self-sufficiency and longer possible. Inasmuch as political ties unite all people and nations, and the bonds of trade and industry, of agriculture and education are being strengthened every day. Hence, the unity of all mankind can, in this day, be achieved. Verily, this is none other but one of the wonders of this wondrous age, the glorious century. Of this past age have been deprived. For this century, the century of light, has been endowed with unique and unprecedented glory, power, and illumination. Hence, the miraculous unfolding of a fresh marvel every day. Eventually it will be seen how bright its candles will burn in the assemblage of men.
The world is, in truth, moving on towards its destiny. The interdependence of the peoples and nations of the earth, whatever the leaders of the divisive forces of the world may say or do, is already an accomplished fact. Its unity in the economic sphere is now understood and recognized. The welfare of the part means the welfare of the whole, and the distress of the part brings distress to the whole. The revelation of Baha'u'llah has, in his own words, lent a fresh impulse and set a new direction. to this vast process now operating in the world. The fires lit by this great ordeal are the consequences of men's failure to recognize it. They are, moreover, hastening its consummation. Adversity, prolonged, worldwide, afflictive, allied to chaos and universal destruction, must needs convulse the nations, stir the conscience of the world, disillusion the masses, precipitate a radical change in the very conception of society, and coalesce ultimately the disjointed, the bleeding limbs of mankind into one body, single, organically united, and indivisible.
We thank all our readers. Of course, they left a lot of food for thought, right? Especially the last paragraph. And we will have Dr. Phelps coming up shortly, and we'll have a very, very lively discussion probably after that. So in the meantime, let's just take a little bit of a different direction than in the past. Let's invite our performers to come, and if they are prepared, are you? And they will play a couple of pieces for us, and then we'll continue. Again, Sandy Simmons and Jamie Fendley, we welcome you.
Our strings, he has to tune us up. And so if we're flexible and we're compliant and we're ready to be of service, then God tunes us. And he tunes us until we're in tune. And then what happens is he'll keep tuning and turning the, what do you call that thing? The tuning peg. And then he plays us, and then the string breaks when we're not flexible. And then he goes on to the next string. We've got 5 strings on it.
The string breaks.
The string breaks. So we've only got 4 strings left, so he'll play those 4 strings, and then one of the strings will be out of tune, and he'll tune it. And then the string's not flexible anymore, the string breaks. Oh well, you've got 3 strings left, so he'll play you, and you'll be of service, find work for you to do, and then he'll tune that 3rd string until it breaks. You've only got 2 strings left. Well, the story, how the story goes. He tuned you until you don't have any more strings, and he sets you up to the side, picks up another guitar, starts over. So, that's what this reminds me of. is that we're all servants. We have the ability to serve until we can't serve anymore. And then Baha'u'llah will find something else for us to do. They'll also find someone else to do our job. So we have to be about our Father's business. This song is dedicated to the fathers in the room. It's my dad's favorite song, one of the many. And this man who wrote the song, I think it was his only song that anybody knows of. And he gave it to Nat King Cole and said, "Would you do my song?" And this is that song. It reminds me of Baha'u'llah and Jesus and Muhammad and Buddha and Krishna and Zoroaster, those wonderful messengers that come to us and bring us God's word, but they also show us, and booming, they also show us how to be. They show us how this world is supposed to work. So that's our job. That's what those writings were about, right? There was a boy, a very strange, enchanted boy. They say he wandered very far over land and sea. A little shy and sad of eye, but very wise was he. And then one day, one magic day, he passed my way. And while we spoke of many things, fools and kings, this he said to me: the greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return. There was a boy, a very strange, enchanted boy. They say he wandered very far over land and sea. A little shy and sad of eye, but very wise was he. And then one day, one magic day, he passed my way. And while we spoke of many things, fools and kings, this he said to me: the greatest thing you will ever learn is just to love and be loved in return. And while we spoke of many things, fools and kings, this he said to me: baby girl, you know the greatest thing you will ever learn is just to love and be loved in return. Just love and be loved in return. Just love and be loved in return. Standing on the mountain, looking across the bay, the Queen of Carmel reigneth. She reigns majestically. Cry out, O Zion. Cry out to your Lord. Cry out, O Zion. Circle round adoration, circle round your Lord. Robed in white and crowned in gold, she stands for unity. God will sail his ark on thee, as mentioned in the book of names. Oh, cry out, oh Zion. Cry out to your Lord. Oh, cry out, oh Zion. Circle round in adoration. Circle round your Lord. Cry out, oh Zion. Cry out to your Lord. Cry out, oh Zion. Circle round in adoration. Circle round your Lord.
Well, our heartfelt thanks to both of you.
Thank you.
Once more, friends, these friends of ours are true professionals who volunteer their time, their talent, to come and make a contribution to us, all of us working together in trying to make the world a better place. So we cherish them and appreciate their talent and their work, and say goodbye to Sandy, who has to leave us now. Thank you. Jamie will come back later. So, a word to our friends who are with us on the internet. We had some technical issues with our sound system and had to use an alternate sound system for the performers and musicians. So if your sound went down a little bit, that was the reason. For the rest of the program, the sound should come back and be strong. So if you were wondering, listening to us, I just wanted you to know what's going on here, so you feel you're right here with us. Last time, friends, we had the privilege that Mr. Hooper Dunbar was here, a member of the Universal House of Justice. As you remember, he did a befitting job of introducing Dr. Stephen Phelps. By the way, his talk the last time, which was on the subject of science and religion from, I believe, if I remember, and the impending revolution, is on YouTube, and as of a few days ago when I looked at it, it had at least 1,600 hits. So it's been very popular. His talk today and the whole program is being recorded again and will go on YouTube for those who want to see it later on. And this time around we have a good friend, Adam Lodwin, if I pronounce your name correctly, who served with Dr. Phelps in Haifa, and I want to ask him and invite him please to come and do the honors and introduce Dr. Phelps for us. We're grateful to you if you do that. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. What a mind-blowing treat to have that performance, Sandy and Jamie, true professionals, and now Stephen in one morning. I don't know what everyone else is doing, but I feel very fortunate to be here. I think we're all in for a real treat with Stephen. I will keep this very brief since I'm the last thing keeping you from hearing him. I had the privilege of serving with Stephen in Haifa 4 years ago, and I was there for 2 years, but Stephen had served there for over a decade, actually, and has returned to the United States and is now living in Portland and is visiting us from Oregon this morning. So a little bit about his background, and then I'll turn it over. Stephen was born in Oregon and went to school at Stanford, where he studied two things. He studied physics, which is easy, so he moved on and also added philosophy, and double majored, and has sort of been on those two tracks for his whole life, a philosophical and spiritual track and a scientific one. And more than anyone that I know, he's been able to bring those two worlds together and sort of share with us the intersections and the insights that emerge from those two fields of study. After that, he served in Haifa, and then pursued his graduate studies at Princeton, where he received a PhD in astrophysics, and because that wasn't challenging enough, studied Persian and Arabic to the point where he was fluent enough to then return to the World Center and translate the writings of the faith for all of us into English. So, I think, just as a side note, I think he also became like the number 6 player on Yahoo Chess or something while he was at Princeton. So not to embarrass him. I think one last just remark was when we were in Haifa, many of us had the privilege of studying with Dr. Phelps, studying the writings with him. And one of the amazing contributions that he's made to those classes was basically explaining how to study the writings in a holistic way, and to look at the writings as a sphere where all the different interconnected teachings come together and can sort of give us a real perspective on the power of the writings. And in the same way that he's studied astronomy and the cosmos and mapped the cosmos in his professional work as a scientist, he's also done that with the Bahai writings, and I'm really excited to hear his presentation this morning, because I'm sure it'll be full of insights, as he always is on this. So with that, I hope I've sufficiently embarrassed you, and if we could please welcome Dr. Phelps to the stage. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam, for embarrassing me. Thanks, Jamie and Sandy, for the beautiful music. So my last talk really was in the domain of science and physics. This time I will stay away from science entirely. So that's kind of a promise, and also a warning that I'll be venturing into territory with which I'm less familiar. And so I will consider this more as a sort of exploratory, a few exploratory comments. One might reasonably assume from the title, Social Change and Spiritual Transformation, that the speaker will be giving a presentation on the Bahai theory of social change. And I want first to disclaim any such notion. There is no Bahai theory of social change any more than there's a Bahai theory of gravity. There are Baha'is who propose theories of social change, drawing inspiration from the Baha'i teachings. And like other theories, they will evolve through dialogue and through the experience gained from putting them into practice. So the comments that follow are intended as a hopeful contribution to this dialogue. Among the challenging claims of the faith established by Baha'u'llah is that its appearance heralds the advent of and promises to act as a catalyst for both a transformation in human consciousness and planet-embracing structural change in human society. Its scope and its claims therefore embrace both our inner and our outer horizons. On the one hand, it represents a renewal and a re-expression of that quintessentially ineffable experience of the divine that lies equally at the heart of all the world's great religions. And on the other hand, it presents the principles and the pattern of a new way of living and being in the world, a new civilization. As Baha'u'llah stated, the world's equilibrium hath been upset through the vibrating influence of this most great, this new world order. Mankind's ordered life hath been revolutionized through the agency of this unique, this wondrous system, the like of which mortal eyes have never witnessed. In some ways, the promised transformational change at a societal level is well upon us. I don't think anyone can question the claim that compared to the slow march of time over the majority of human history, for the last couple of centuries, we've been experiencing an era of astonishing change. Just to mention a few signal trends, the exponential pace of scientific and technical knowledge and innovation, the resulting explosion in human population, the precipitous shrinking of the globe through advances in transportation and communication, and alarmingly, the increasing impact of human activity on the environment. The claim of the Baha'i message is that all of these very visible and tangible changes, which are leaving their mark on the very surface of the planet, are manifestations of a deeper cause, with which the purpose of the Baha'i faith is intimately connected. After a long and dimly remembered childhood, humanity, the Baha'i teachings assert, is entering the outer fringes of the most perilous stage of its existence, and lies on the cusp of an epoch-making, if often painful, transition to its long-awaited coming of age. In the words of Shoghi Effendi, the great-grandson of Baha'u'llah, humanity taken as a whole has entered the most critical and momentous stage of its evolution, the stage of maturity. The idea of the coming of age of mankind constitutes the central core of the Baha'i teachings and is the most distinguishing feature of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. A proper understanding of this concept gives the key to an adequate appreciation of the tremendous claim made by the author of the faith, both with regard to his own station and to the incomparable greatness of his dispensation. As far as we have come since we first banded together in social units, what we have yet to achieve then is more momentous still. For the hallmark of this coming of age is a transformation and a maturation of consciousness itself. Consciousness of our own selves, to start with, that spark of awareness that lies within and that sets us apart from both inert matter and other animate life on the planet. Consciousness that the same spark of awareness lies within others. Consciousness of the workings of the material world with its mathematical relationships and symmetries. Consciousness of our organic unity and relatedness, our common biological origin. Consciousness, finally, of our ultimate origin and purpose. That we have not emerged from nothingness only to fret a few moments on the stage and then pass back into nothingness, but that what we can only describe in our limited human terms as a loving providence watches over us and desires intimate communion with us. We come from God and we return to God. And with this we get to the heart of the revolutionary purpose of the Baha'i faith in the world. Baha'u'llah has not brought into existence a new religion to stand beside the present multiplicity of sectarian organizations. Rather has he recast the whole conception of religion as the principal force impelling the development of consciousness. We might sum all this up by saying that the trend line in the cosmos, in the Baha'i view, is towards increasing consciousness and ultimately consciousness of that divine reality whose attributes are reflected in all things and in all people. World consciousness, that stage which we are now entering, is the latest, though not the final, chapter in the story of the cosmos. So the practical question that arises for those who embrace this vision of the future of humanity is, how do we get from where we are now to that exalted vision? Well, first of all, we might take comfort in the assurance that if we do nothing, we'll get there anyway. It's no different from any adolescent child facing the inevitable onset of maturity. Then why make any special effort in promoting the inevitable? The Universalis of Justice put it this way: world peace is not only possible, but inevitable. It is the next stage in the evolution of this planet. In the words of one great thinker, the planetization of mankind. Whether peace is to be reached only after unimaginable horrors precipitated by humanity's stubborn clinging to old patterns of behavior, or is to be embraced now by an act of consultative will, is the choice before all who inhabit the earth. At this critical juncture, when the intractable problems confronting nations have been fused into one common concern for the whole world, failure to stem the tide of conflict and disorder would be unconscionably irresponsible. So this, in simple terms, is why we act. But practically then, two avenues lie before us. Creation of new social structures, we can think of this as a top-down approach or view, and transformation of the individual, a bottom-up approach. Which comes first? Do we create social structures in the expectation that people will conform and adapt to them? Do we focus on individual transformation in the hope that the right social structures will emerge? Obviously, it's some combination of both. The two interact on each other. Social change is a result of interactions between profound changes of consciousness at an individual level and changes in the structure of society. This is reinforced by the reality that we are not isolated motes, but part of a larger fabric. As Shoghi Effendi stated, man is organic with the world. His inner life molds the environment and is itself also deeply affected by it. The one acts on the other, and every abiding change in the life of man is the result of these mutual interactions. Individual spiritual transformation, thus, is not to retreat to some mountaintop or to the monastery. It is to be in the world, interacting with others. As David Starr Jordan, the first president of Stanford University, put it, referring to Abdu'l-Baha, it's a matter of treading the mystic way with practical feet. So to become spiritual, to transform our consciousness as individuals, we don't turn away from the world and become otherworldly, ethereal creatures. Rather, we see engagement in the world as a principal means of individual transformation. We roll up our sleeves and get to work. As Baha'u'llah said, be anxiously concerned with the needs of the day in which you live and center your deliberations on its exigencies and requirements. Of course, at the same time, we have to be detached. We're in the world, but we're not of the world. We're aware of its ultimate transience and ephemerality. But we realize that social engagement is our primary means of individual spiritual transformation. So this leads to a question, I think a difficult question, and one that I want to offer some tentative exploratory remarks about. With what latitude does this individual action take place? Is this engagement, social engagement, in an individualistic sense or in a collective sense? I know I'm offering maybe a false dichotomy just for the sake of setting forth the question. Are we an army marching in lockstep, or are we a herd of cats? Certainly it's neither extreme. It's one of the most difficult and long debated of questions. What is the extent and what are the boundaries of individual rights and freedoms? Perhaps the metaphor of coming of age with which we began is relevant here. What does the coming of age imply in the life of an individual? The adult has all the freedoms of the child and the adolescent and more besides. But the responsibility of the adult is proportionately greater, as is the expectation of self-restraint. The age of maturity is characterized by greater freedom as well as greater responsibility. This point was made by the Universal of Justice in the context of obedience to the laws of Baha'u'llah, which have been put forth in schematic form but not covering every possible human activity. They said, and this is a letter in 1988, in most areas of human behavior, there are acts which are clearly contrary to the law of God and others which are clearly approved or permissible. Between these, there is often a gray area where it is not immediately apparent what should be done. It has been a human tendency to wish to eliminate these gray areas so that every aspect of life is clearly prescribed. A result of this tendency has been the tremendous accretion of interpretation and subsidiary legislation which has smothered the spirit of certain of the older religions. This is the age in which mankind must attain maturity. And one aspect of this is the assumption by individuals of the responsibility for deciding, with the assistance of consultation, their own course of action in areas which are left open by the law of God. So I ask the question, how far does this principle extend? And to put a point on it, do we as Baha'is anticipate a future society where individual rights and freedoms are greater than what we now enjoy in the West, or less? If the analogy of coming of age is accurate, then perhaps we ultimately sit along the spectrum of greater individual freedoms. Perhaps paradoxically. Is this not necessary, we might argue, in order to pursue to its logical end the independent investigation of reality, which is the central teaching of our faith? But if so, where does this freedom end? Undoubtedly, there are and must be limits which provide the necessary balance. We strive towards a golden mean, avoiding both extremes, the extreme individualism at the expense of society, liberty as license to do whatever we want on the one hand, and on the other hand, a life of regimentation. And I think it's on this point of liberty as license that Baha'u'llah speaks so strongly in his Kitabi Akdas, in his Book of Laws. He says, "Know ye that the embodiment of liberty and its symbol is the animal. That which beseemeth man is submission unto such restraints as will protect him from his own ignorance, and guard him against the harm of the mischief maker. Liberty causeth man to overstep the bounds of propriety, and to infringe on the dignity of his station. It debaseth him to the level of extreme depravity and wickedness." And the House of Justice asks, in connection to this, where does freedom limit our possibilities for progress, and where do limits free us to thrive? These statements leave open for conversation and debate, I think, the question of how the necessary limits on freedom are to be imposed. It is possible that the restraint called for by Baha'u'llah is to be a voluntary act, something that happens as a matter of course when the human consciousness reaches maturity. Obedience and constraint then are not so much to an authority imposed from without, but to a higher law arising from within. The same as with any adult. So let me give an example that might help to put a little bit of meat on those bones. And that's an example from the economic sphere. Oftentimes in lists of Baha'i principles, we'll list 10 or 12 social principles of the Baha'i faith, and one of these is often given somewhat cryptically as a spiritual solution to the economic problem. What is meant by a spiritual solution to the economic problem? Well, first of all, what is the economic problem? Let's assume and take that to mean the problem of the tremendous disparity in means that exists today. Disparity which I think most would consider to be unjust. What's the solution to this problem? Is the solution a structural change? Is the solution laws and ordinances, a better tax code, a welfare state, something that is mandated from above, mandated by a higher authority that tends to restrict our freedoms? Or is it something that comes from the ground up? Is it something that in a future society will not be a matter of laws and ordinances, but will be a matter of our own conscious and voluntary choice? It's the second of these options that we find stated repeatedly in the Baha'i writings. Let's hear Abdu'l-Baha on this subject. He says, to state the matter briefly, the teachings of Baha'u'llah advocate voluntary sharing. And this is a greater thing than the equalization of wealth. For equalization must be imposed from without, while sharing is a matter of free choice. Voluntary sharing, the freely chosen expending of one's substance, leadeth to society's comfort and peace. It lighteth up the world. It bestoweth honor upon humankind. In another letter, Abdu'l-Baha says, and among the teachings of Baha'u'llah is voluntary sharing of one's property with others among mankind. This voluntary sharing is greater than equality and consists in this, that man should not prefer himself to others, but rather should sacrifice his life and property for others. But this should not be introduced by coercion, so that it becomes a law and man is compelled to follow it. Nay, rather, man should voluntarily and of his own choice sacrifice his property and life for others, and spend willingly for the poor, just as is done in Persia among the Baha'is. In a talk that Abdu'l-Baha gave in April of 1912, he puts another point on this. He says, people must not be forced by circumstances to help the poor. They must give aid willingly. That which the socialists aim to accomplish in the economic world will in time be done by the people freely through faith and love and cooperation. For that which is established through loving friendship is permanent. And elsewhere, but here is the real solution. The rich should be merciful to the poor, but with their free will, not with force. Should it be with force, it would be useless. It should be according to law and not by violence, so that through a general law, everyone might know his duty. All of this may sound like complete pie in the sky on the face of it. You might think, well, if we were to put that in effect now, it wouldn't work. And I don't think it would work. I don't think that the solution of voluntary sharing is a viable solution if it were imposed from above, because it's not going to be successful until something happens from below. It's not going to be successful until some critical mass of individuals are transformed in their consciousness and awareness so that they could not bear to see their neighbor in a state of want and extreme need. That transformation of consciousness, we believe, is what ultimately lies in front of us. It may not be this generation, it may not be next generation. It may be 100 years in the future or more. But if that's the direction that things are going, then what might that imply for the kinds of social structures that we imagine ultimately will be appropriate for that future age of humanity? So setting aside for the moment the needs of today, which may require different solutions, given the state of consciousness humanity has so far attained, will a future society need things like welfare laws, or will a critical mass of people see to it personally that widespread poverty is eliminated? I think this question that I'm raising, behind this question that I'm raising, lies, I think, an idea that we should be able to dissociate or decouple the short-term exigencies and the short-term requirements of today with what may be appropriate in the longer term. Changes in individual consciousness at a societal level, the personal transformation half of the great purpose of the Baha'i faith, will enable new social structures, new forms of governance that we may not even be able to imagine putting into place today. Abdu'l-Baha said this also in one of his talks in the United States. He said, among the results of the manifestation of spiritual forces will be that the human world will adapt itself to a new social form. I think this idea provides just one more reason not to try to cast our thinking about Baha'i solutions to this or that social problem in terms of existing systems of government or economic philosophies, not only because it's disunifying, but because it limits our conceptual horizons. The social structures appropriate to an age of maturity may be different from those that are appropriate to an age of adolescence. And we simply cannot extrapolate from here to there. The future may greatly surprise us. So I want to end what I think what is in the end a sort of a shorter talk than I thought I might give, with sort of bringing it back to the here and now, and asking again the question, how will social change and transformation then come about? And touching once again on these sort of two options that I'd mentioned. On the one hand, we are in the world now, so we act according to the exigencies of the hour. We make do in the world. We are practical. We are social activists. We are anxiously concerned with the needs of the day. We feed the poor. We work on improving existing social structures, or we put in place new ones. We support beneficial reforms. As Baha'u'llah says, the divine physician prescribes a remedy for each ailment, and that ailment is different from age to age. So there's a practical side. There's a side of, yes, let's find the structures and implement these structures. But at the same time, we realize that whatever structural changes in society we propose and enact are a means to an end. We realize that real change will arise only after individual human consciousness is transformed, and that transformation will be the inexorable result of our continuing evolution. We realize that the bright future promise, the kingdom of God, will not come about from a better tax code or fair elections. It will not come about first and foremost by inventing new structures to impose from above. The real paradigm-shifting, epoch-making change will come about only after a sufficient critical mass of individuals advances to the next stage in human consciousness, which is true regard and love, not just for one's neighbor, but for all humanity. The real epicenter of change, then, is thus the individual, the family, the neighborhood, the village, and we can all be agents of change at this level, one soul at a time, by educating our children, by living our lives according to these revolutionary principles, and joining with others and walking a path of service together in all our diversity. Thank you.
Dr. Phelps, as ever, we are grateful to you. Thank you very much for an stimulating talk. But don't run away yet, because I'm sure our friends have some questions for you. Is that correct? Anyone has any questions, any comments, any thoughts? Come on back, please. May I ask you to come back? And you just share yourself. I'll be the guy. I will distribute the microphone for you.
Yeah.
So I've been listening to a course by Professor Jeffrey Sachs on sustainable development from Columbia University. And I just wondered if maybe you could, this topic is so interesting. I'm wondering, in terms of what we're doing to our planet at the moment, what are some practical ways that we can actually be making a difference, understanding that it takes a critical mass to really make a change in consciousness, but
Yes.
wondering if you have some suggestions on how we can apply this right now.
I don't have any, having absolutely no experience in the field of sustainable development, I don't think I could offer any practical or helpful suggestions in that particular area. But just to, I suppose, reiterate what the ideas I were expressing were, that we sort of have two avenues, and whenever you make a dichotomy, you're simplifying and you're losing something. But the way I was thinking of it was that we have sort of two avenues. We can do something structural, a new policy, a new program, a new agency, and these are good and necessary for now. I mean, it betters the lives of people now, and there are an infinite number of ways to do that and be involved and to sort of absorb yourself and dedicate yourself to the here and now. At the same time, what I wanted to suggest is that what we have in mind is a completely different kind of society. And that completely different kind of society, this new world order that Baha'u'llah promises, if we knew what that new world order was, if we knew what the laws were, what the structures were, what the form of governance was, what the economic system was, if we could somehow look into a crystal ball and see however many hundreds of years in the future, and take that and then try to do that now and say, okay, well, let's get a head start on it and let's do it now. My argument would be it would fail. And it would fail because the structure has to fit those individuals which are part of it. The best and an ideal political and economic system has to take into account the realities of the individuals that comprise it. And it's those individual realities and consciousnesses which are in the process of transforming, which are on the cusp of this revolutionary change from this adolescence and childhood of the race into a state of maturity. And what I want to suggest is that once we cross that threshold into maturity, then human motives, to take one example, will no longer be so predictably based upon self-interest, but they will now be based on other sets of interests. And therefore, the structures that we put in place can take into account that new reality at the individual level. That, well, most of the people now, and I don't know when or how that tipping point happens, but at some point there'll be some tipping point where instead of being able to assume that most people act according to this motive, we'll be able to assume that most people act according to that motive, and that will make possible other sorts of things. And those other sorts of things, those other sorts of structures, I think are the ultimate solution. That's the golden age. That's the kingdom of God on earth. That's the New Jerusalem. But it can't come about by simply taking the patterns and structures of that, even if we knew what it was, and applying it now. So then we then have open to us the second pathway. The first pathway is, well, let's put in place the structures and policies that we can now to make life better in the here and now. At the same time, we have a second avenue, which is deeper, ultimately more far-reaching, but perhaps completely invisible in its effect today. And we're talking about changing first ourselves and our children and those around us by helping to advance that consciousness so that it becomes world-embracing. Because it's only through a transition to a world-embracing consciousness that we will able to ultimately have and implement the ultimate solutions. And so I suppose, on a practical level, I suppose it comes down to how I ended my thoughts, which is that we have these sort of two ways of thinking, two ways of being in the world. We have there's the here and now, and then there's the in the long term, we have a much grander, far more optimistic, and what probably a lot of people would say completely unrealistic view of how things are going. But ultimately, the only proof of that is going to be by making the change. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Phelps. That was an amazing table of nutritious food for thought.
Thank you.
Actually, I was thinking in what you said in terms of developing that human consciousness, starting individually, and of course, as someone who's believed in Baha'u'llah's revelation, we adhere to what we call his vision, but we don't know what that vision is really, because we are in uncharted territory. Now, even for somebody who's been exposed to these literature, the Baha'i literature and writings, which is immense, and we haven't even explored the surface of it, it's hard to, the example that I could give is that we are driving at night where our headlights are only showing certain distance. Yet we are told that there's this map. It's hard to imagine how the road looks unless you travel it to get to those places. So how can we best transfer this sort of idea, the vision, that is to inspire the humanity towards that development of the collective consciousness?
Thank you. Yeah, I completely agree.
How can we do that?
How can we inspire people to reach that stage of collective consciousness? That's the whole question. That's a sort of how. And we do that by first and foremost being an example of that change that we want to see in the world. I think it's as simple as that. We can talk all we want, but until we actually are the change that we want to be and we want others to be, no one is going to be convinced that it's possible, because on paper it looks absolutely impossible. On paper it looks like complete utopia. And so I think the only way it's going to happen is when we ourselves are the change and we teach our children to be that change, and just that limited circle that we personally have influence over to be the change to them, and to bring our immediate environment to that sort of perfection which it's capable of. Almost as a completely, it popped into my mind, but this is it's a glancingly related side note. There's an amazing tablet by the Bab, who was the forerunner to Baha'u'llah, where he gives us the 3 keys to happiness. And the 3 keys to happiness, and it was given in very telegraphic form, and I'm sort of expanding on it as I say it, but he basically says the 3 keys of happiness are 1, the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. 2, always tell the truth. And 3, I have to expand on this a bit, but bring everything in your environment that's within your control to its level of perfection. And that's always struck me such a profound idea, because it takes the idea of human fulfillment, human happiness, out of the realm of just satisfying ourselves, satisfying our own wants and desires, and saying, actually, your happiness is a direct function, your perfection is a direct function of the perfection of that whole circle of awareness and influence that you exercise. So, and this goes, and this can be taken in very interesting directions. He talks about how you should build homes to the highest level of perfection that you're capable. He says, if the doorway is too short, he said the very walls and bricks of that building will cry out for deliverance because they've been built imperfectly. You take this as a sort of hyperbolic way of making the point that if you have the power to make something perfect, and you don't make it perfect or sort of bring it along that road to perfection, then that has implications and adverse impact on your own happiness. I guess another way of putting it is that everything is intimately connected. And what we do, our actions, have invisible but very definite effect, ripple effect, throughout, first of all, our immediate circle of acquaintances and beyond that in the world. And it's something that at some level we have to have faith that that's the case, because we don't often see the consequences of our actions. But we know that everything is connected and that this is a great truth. Abdu'l-Baha calls this one of the great, one of the deep principles of divine philosophy, he says, is this interconnectedness of all things.
Yes. Thank you for a good talk. And one of the things that bothers me all the time, and nobody really talks about it a lot, is the continual increase in overpopulation on our planet of human beings. And I don't know how it can be addressed. I mean, it's a biological thing and all of that, but I know when I was a child, I read a book about we were overpopulated, and I'm 67 now, and it's still continuing. And I don't understand how we can survive on the planet with the resources and everything, but at the same time, I don't know how to help. I don't know how to address it. I thought maybe we could give a free vacation to every couple that doesn't have a child before age 30 or something. I mean,
that could go the other direction.
What?
Free vacations. It could go, anyway. Go.
Yeah, but something to sort of give people, I don't know, an idea about.
Sure. I don't know anything about this as in a technical. I haven't studied overpopulation. I haven't studied the practical or social solutions. But could I just throw out the possibility that this one is going to solve itself? And the reason I suggest this is because if you look at population growth around the world, you say, well, where are the big centers of, where is all the growth happening, and where is the growth slowing? There's a definite correlation between the countries that are more advanced technologically have lower rates of population growth, to the extent even that in Europe, I believe it's a negative population growth if you exclude immigrant populations. And so it seems to be one of those things that may work itself out, that as technology, as wealth becomes more widespread, as the poorest of the poor become less poor. In other words, as we resolve these social issues, one of the, I think, great drivers of population growth is poverty. I imagine that one of the reasons people have large amounts of children is for their own security, because if you don't have money in the bank, well, you have people to take care of you. And so this may be one of those issues where, yeah, right now it looks like things are on this exponential path to complete destruction, but I think this one may sort of resolve itself. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are other factors that influence, well, not population per se, but resources. So I think when we solve the problems of things like war, famine, and climate change, and all the reasons why we don't have a lot of resources in vast areas of the world, that would be a factor.
Yeah. Is there any other questions?
You mentioned critical mass.
Yes.
Now, in physics or in physical realities, we can understand it's a given temperature, a speed, a certain speed, etc. What is critical mass in terms of social change? Number of people, their impact, their type of impact, what is it?
I would read Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point. That's a good starting point anyway. I mean, he's analyzed this idea of critical masses where you have a large population that's completely unaware of something, and you have certain people who are drivers of awareness of that thing. And at some point, the awareness of the thing reaches a point where it becomes common knowledge. It's a long time ago that I read that book, but that's one of the features of it. And he identified different individuals who are responsible for this tipping point in different ways. You have people who connect other people. You have people who sort of drill deep and are masters of that thing. I can't remember what the third group was. The connectors and the mavens and the something. Maybe the one way of looking at it is we can think of ourselves as connectors. The more people we connect with these ideas, the more people we can spark with these ideas. At some point, and we can't quantify it because it's not physics. I mean, it's human nature, which is far more complicated than physics. But at some point, and we see this in all sorts of memes, we see it in the Twitter sphere, we see it in, just as a phrase will suddenly, and we're seeing this now accelerate now that you have websites like Twitter. Someone will invent a phrase and they'll put it out there, and you'll see that the usage of that phrase exploding among people. Thousands and then millions of people use that phrase until it's a sort of a common knowledge. Oh yeah, it's that meme that everyone's talking about. How can we make these ideas viral in that sense? How can we, maybe with more consciousness of the nature and means of how ideas spread, particularly in the modern age, we can make better use of technologies. This is just by way of spreading information, but in the end, you come back to the point that until people experience it in others, until people see the change in others, it's not really going to change the hearts. But we can at least get the word out, I think, far more effectively using these modern methods.
Thank you for your wonderful speech this morning. I have a question regarding people who want to grow spiritually but don't want necessarily a plan or a structure. And they feel that if they raise their consciousness on their own or through their own devices, that's just as good, that there will be a transformation without the need of an interior structure to base that growth in consciousness.
I think that will always be the case. I mean, there will always be. I think of people as a bell-shaped curve. There's and this is one of the great truths of the scientific world as well as in the human world. Take any large population, take any large collection of objects, and map where it is on any particular quantifiable dimension, and you're probably going to get something like a bell-shaped curve. You're going to have a median where most of the people are, where most of the things are, which is a definable thing. At either extreme, you're going to have the tails of the distribution, and that's natural, it's normal, it's not something that we're threatened by, it's not something that needs to be solved. It's an aspect of human nature. I think it's a similar thing for example, the direction that the Bahai community is going. There's a median that's been set. There's a plan that's been put in place. That's the median of the curve, and the majority of people are on that medium and on that sort of median point and are working in that direction. At either end of the curve, there are people who, for whatever reason, decide they don't want to participate. The House of Justice in that on that point has said explicitly that's fine. You know, there are people who have different priorities, who want to see things differently, who want to enact these principles in their lives in a different way, and no one should feel pressured, you know, if you're a point that's on this end of the distribution to be somewhere in the middle of the distribution on the other side or whatever. It's something that we should be aware of, that there is a process, there is a trend line, there's something that the community as a whole is doing, and we certainly don't want to get in the way of that. But at the same time, we're not asked to sacrifice our own personal spiritual connection for the sake of something that we don't find it in our hearts, that we're not able in our hearts to do. Just personal thoughts. Yes?
I'm sorry, I have one question. Being that we've been asked to be aware of the time in which we live and be concerned with the issues, as Abdul Baha said, I'm wondering about if you could help us understand social discourse and how we can engage in that social discourse in a meaningful way with people in our community.
Oh, that's a huge question. And that's a huge component of the plan that the Baha'i community is now engaged in. What we're asked to do is find ways of participating in the dialogue, find ways of bringing our thoughts in and being a part of the conversation. I think things like this are one way of doing it. For example, using these amazing mechanisms of the internet, I think is a great way. I mean, you can broadcast thoughts and ideas in ways unimaginable just a few years ago. You know, with a little effort and a little sort of learning, get involved in this chat group or set up a blog or something like that. This is just one small direction we can think of to do it on an individual level. And then, of course, as a community, there's a whole other range of possibilities that are open to us, ways of being involved in various issues and finding ways that we can collectively contribute. I don't know. It's such a huge question, and I'm not sure. You know, I have a great answer in a nutshell. But it's one of these things where the opportunities are endless, and maybe one thing that we can do personally is delve deeply into it ourselves, not just what the Baha'i writings have to do on this particular issue that we may be interested in, this particular social issue, but then reading outside into, well, what are people outside saying? What is I don't want to say outside versus inside, but what is the world saying about this particular issue? Be interested in, involved in, and engaged with the current thinking on things. And that takes effort and persistence and dedication of time on our part. And it's a huge job, because just to be up on some particular issue of interest and sort of what's the conversation on this in the world is a whole task to itself, apart from, well, what do the Baha'i teachings have to say about this? And then apart from that, I mean, it's not obvious in most cases what the Baha'i teachings have to say on something. That's one thing I wanted to do in this talk, was suggest that what we might have thought was obvious, you know, this question of rights and freedoms, for example, the more I think about it, the less obvious it is to me. Is it necessarily this direction or this direction? I can see it go either direction and be consistent with the Baha'i teachings as I've read them. And so I think that there's no clear-cut answer as to what the Baha'i contribution to any particular dialogue is going to be. So I'm just saying it's even harder. Basically, it's very difficult and requires sort of dedication and commitment, I think, to be able to take any steps. Thanks, Jamshid. Thank you all for coming.
Let's thank Dr. Phelps. Friends, this has been a very stimulating discussion, as you know, and as Dr. Phelps also noted, the purpose of our gathering is also in line with the question that you raised. And we come here, and we've talked about this openly every time, although we used the word Baha'i a lot of times, this time especially, but we'll come really here as an example of embracing our community, regardless of backgrounds, regardless of what nationalities, what religions, what our school of thought would come, with one purpose, really to go through a process that, again, you explained, and when you were talking about real change will come through individual human consciousness, when individual human consciousness will change. And also you talked about starting with our own families and so on and so forth, and you shared the example of our own children. Well, we are also trying to do that with our own neighbors. We are also trying to do that with people in our city. We are also trying to do that with many means that we are doing in the process of community building that the Baha'i community is engaged in this local area. As you know, for example, some of our own youngsters, youth and junior youth, have started going to a park in the Slauson Park. They have made many friends. They have started really bringing this consciousness to the youngsters in that group, and so on and so forth. So this is repeating all over the place. And our hope has been that these gatherings, when we come together with people of all religions and all backgrounds, really plays as that gateway to initiation of activities that will take this consciousness to the next level. So let's leave it there. So that's our hope. And we know that numerous things have started from here, and we hope that that will continue. However, I know that we are going over time, and I know that our friends next door are waiting for us. And I've noticed that some of our friends have had other commitments and need to leave as well. Let me just ask Jamie, our friend, to come back and have a closure for us, if that's okay with you. And then we'll all go next door and we'll enjoy and so on. And before I do that, while you come up, I can tell you that I just found a dear friend here, Mr. Semenderi, who has come from Switzerland, correct? Yes. With him and I, those of you who are of Persian background, you remember the program we had with Dr. Shapur Rasakh some months back, who talked to us through the internet from Switzerland. Mr. Semenderi was the instrumental person from Switzerland with whom we spent hours trying to get the internet connections and so on and so forth to make that program happen. And I just noticed from having seen his face on the internet, and he's here. So the world is coming together. Welcome to our center, by the way, this time in person. So let me turn it over to Jamie with our great and heartfelt appreciation. Go ahead.
Well, in the spirit of the topic for discussion, the spiritual transformation, this is actually a piece that I composed called Spiritual Transformation. How convenient.
Jamie, that was soothing to the soul indeed. Thank you very much. With all wholehearted appreciation. Thank you. Friends, we owe our depth of appreciation and to many, many people, and are grateful to Dr. Phelps, who has come here from Portland. Thank you very much. To Jamie, to Sandy Simmons, to those who are helping us with audiovisual. Larry's Hansel is in the back, audio room, people who have cooked the food, those who are serving it, and the list can go on and on and on and on. But at last, I think we would have the last round of applause for all of you who are here. And let's do that, please. A round of applause for you and for those of our friends who have stayed with us on the internet, because this is the way, this is one way. There are many, many, many ways to do this. This is one way we want to spread that change of consciousness. So please keep that in mind, that this is a gate, all right? And as we go forward, please remember, the next time you can bring your neighbor, you can bring your coworker, you can bring a person who run into in a coffee shop or in a grocery store or somewhere with you, and continue that process. And as you leave here, you can think about what we can, each of us, start and initiate or collaborate with our friends in making our communities a better place. Thank you for coming. The food is waiting for you. Friendship and networking is waiting next door. At this point, I say goodbye to our friends who are on the internet with us. Sorry that we cannot serve you food. Maybe the technology will provide doing so sometime in the future, but I don't think it would be in my lifetime. So have a great day, everybody, and thank you for coming.